Hi, this is the Tolkien curmudgeon. It's been quite a while since I've made a video. I was on vacation in the United States, and while I was there, I found out something that really amazed me. I found out that I was wrong about what really happened in Nargothrond and Doriath. I didn't realize that 2 years ago, the complete text of a sketch that Tolkien wrote out, mostly of almost the whole Silmarillion, but describing those things that related to his poem, The Hoard. And it contains an account of the ruin of Doriath. And it was written in 1963. It's amazing, and I'm really shocked that it's so little known. I found it as a little tiny link way at the bottom of an article about the Nauglamir on the Tolkien Gateway website, which I don't often look at because I prefer, to read the original texts. But there I was checking out what they say about the Nauglamir, and they didn't say really anything in the main article, but down at the bottom is just this thing called Concerning the Hoard, and you click on it and a whole new world opened up for me. Well, some of the amazing things I found out were what were Hurin's actual words when he had the treasure thrown down at the feet of Thingol. Well, anyway, we can say that the last account that Tolkien ever wrote of this story, it did have Hurin with a band of outlaws who went to Nargothrond. They killed Mime, they took the treasure, but Mime did not curse the treasure. The treasure was cursed. Why? Because it was a dragon hoard. The dragon hoard is what made the hoard so horrible. Now, after they brought it to Thingol, there was a big to-do after Hurin left. And Hurin left without having any kind of revelation from Melian about anything. He left bitterly. And then his outlaws fought for the gold, and they were all killed. An amazing part of it, too, is that we don't really find out which answer Tolkien preferred, but he gave two different answers to why the protective magic wall called the Girdle of Melian, why it came down and why the dwarves were able to get into Doriath. He gives two different reasons. One is that Melian was so grief-stricken and so sorrowful about what had happened that she took away the Girdle of Melian. The other is that the evil of the hoard itself, or the evil deeds that were done because of the hoard, made the Girdle of Melian, that made the Girdle of Melian ineffective. But we don't really know. And another thing we don't know is what in the end happened to Melian. So it turns out that we still really need to make up our own version, in a sense, of certain of the details. We don't really know what happened. But we do know that the version in chapter 22 of the Silmarillion was not written by J.R.R. Tolkien. So I'm going to read to you some of what I've discovered here, which you can still find on the internet, even though several years after this text, which was handwritten by Tolkien, was auctioned off. Okay, here I'm going to read it for you. These are the words of J.R.R. Tolkien in 1963, which he included in a letter to Mrs. Elgar. At that time, the Dark Lord released Hurin, not out of mercy, but to bring confusion among his enemies. Hurin had refused to accept the Dark Lord or bow to him, but he was now partly unhinged by his torment and imprisonment, and, though unwittingly, deluded by lies and deceits of the Dark Lord. The Dark Lord had threatened him that if he did not submit, a terrible doom would fall upon his wife and children, Turin and Niniel. This came to pass, and all that happened was reported to Hurin, but in such a way that it appeared to him that all the evils were brought about through the greed and arrogance of the elves, and of Thingol in particular. Hurin thus came forth, a fierce and dangerous but terribly vigorous old man, filled with grief and anger, and the desire to punish all who had dealings with his family. Among other evils that he wrought was the plundering of the hoard of Nargothrond. He gathered a great company of violent outlaws, And they came to Nargothrond and slew Mime, and carried off a great part of the dragon treasure. Dominated by his will and by fear of him, they brought this treasure to Doriath, and there Húrin cast it before the feet of King Thingol in a proud gesture of scorn, saying that as the lord of the house of Hador, Húrin vowed not to be beholden to an elf king for the fostering of his son, nor the harboring of his wife and daughter. Quote, "Here is your fee, more than enough, maybe, for services so meanly performed. But hold me now out of your debt and friendship." Thingol was amazed at the insult, but answered with patience and courtesy, saying he wished for no ending of friendship with Húrin, whose name was honored among elves and men for his great valor in the last great battle. And near all elves and men had been rather in his debt ever since. But Húrin laughed in contempt and went out unmolested into the night. But even as he did so, Thingol looked at the hoard, and the dragon curse began to work upon him, and upon all those who gazed at the treasure. The outlaws, released from the presence of Húrin, claimed that it was theirs, won by their weapons and labor. Fighting broke out, even in the inviolable halls of Thingol. Blood was spilled on either side, and in the end all the outlaws were slain, and Thingol then had the treasure locked in a deep chamber. But it gnawed his mind. For most of the treasure that had been brought from Nargothrond was in gold and silver yet unwrought, and he lusted especially for the silver, thinking what might be done with it. At last, in an unhappy hour, he sent for the dwarves of the mountains in the east from Belegost and Nogrod. With them he had dealings and some friendship, and long ago they had helped in the building of his grand underground halls and palace. The dwarves sent emissaries, and they gazed on the treasure in amazement. After bargaining, they agreed to send their best smiths to work at Thingol's orders, but at the price of 1 tithe of the unwrought metals. The smiths came and labored long, and among other marvelous works, they made the renowned necklace of the dwarves, of silver, upon which was set in the middle the peerless Silmaril that Beren and Luthien had won from the iron crown of the Dark Lord. But as their work progressed, Thingol began to regret the bargain, and in particular, he saw that if the tithe was paid in full, not enough would remain for the making of a thing upon which he had now set his spell-distraught heart, a double throne of silver and gems for himself and Melian the queen. When the dwarves had ended their work, he demurred, offering less than the tithe, or demanding at least that the throne should be made and other treasure given instead of the silver required. The dwarves were angered, all the more because they had themselves come under the dragon's spell. They rejected Thingol's terms and refused anything less than the full tithe of the treasure of Nargothrond. Unpaid, they departed in wrath. Back in their mountain stronghold, they plotted revenge, and not long after, they came down with a great force and invaded Doriath. This had before been impossible because of the girdle of Melian, an invisible fence maintained by her power and will through which no one with evil intent could pass. But either this fence had been robbed of its power by the evil within, or Melian had removed it in grief and horror at the deeds that had been done. The dwarf host entered Doriath, and most of Thingol's warriors perished. His halls were violated, and he himself slain. According to dwarf honesty, however, nothing was taken of all his treasures save the hoard of Nargothrond. This the dwarves had claimed, part as bargained pay, part as recompense for broken troth, and the need to make a great expedition to obtain their rights. Also, they now urged, the treasure had been taken with violence and murder from a dwarf, though Mime was not in fact akin to the dwarves of the eastern mountains. The great necklace was taken from Thingol as he lay dead. Then the dwarves departed from their honesty, in spite of the warning of the wisest among them. They lusted for the peerless and supremely powerful gem, and under the plea that it would ruin their handiwork to remove it from the necklace, they carried it off. Fugitives from Doriath brought news to Beren in Osiriand, especially of the rape of the Silmaril. He gathered a force and waylaid the dwarves on their return march at a ford across one of the 7 rivers of Osir. Then the dwarves were routed. The gold and silver was cast into the river, which hereafter bore a new name signifying Golden Bed. But Beren rescued the necklace and the Silmaril. Luthien wore it until ere long she and Beren passed away and were heard of no more in Middle-earth. Well, there you have it. The part of concerning the hoard that refers to the ruin of Doriath, or at least the theft of the treasure. It's amazing that it's so little known. And no doubt, chapter 22 of the Silmarillion would have been quite different if Christopher Tolkien had even known about this text or had ever read it at the time he and Guy Kay wrote that chapter. So we are left with a few things that we still don't know. What happened to Melian? Where did she go? We don't have an answer. So in our own minds, perhaps we still need to complete a little bit of Tolkien's Legendarium. And then we need to choose which of the 2 reasons is it? Is it that Melian was so grief-stricken and horrified by the evil deeds that had been done that she intentionally removed the girdle of Melian? Or is it that the evil of those deeds or of the hoard itself made the girdle ineffective? I would choose that one, because Melian intentionally removing it, wow, the result was that Thingol, her husband, was killed. Anyway, I'm so happy that I finally found this text, and I'm amazed that I'm finding out still more and more about what really happened in Nargothrond and Doriath. Thank you. Bye-bye.